Hello, everyone, and welcome to Game Center Live. Game Center Live is our weekly streaming show from NYU Game Center, which is a game design program of New York University. And today we are still operating in remote mode of day 500 of the COVID quarantine. And
of the event.
of the event. And today we are doing our typical segment, the discourse, where our rock star faculty, Naomi Clark and Frank Lantz, talk about important industry news and issues of the day. So take it away, Naomi and Frank.
Hey, everybody,
Hi.
remain indoors.
Yes, please keep washing your hands, especially if
Mhm,
you go out of doors.
mhm.
And with that, let's just jump into our first link. What do we have up first? I think it's Animal Crossing, right? So let's talk about Bunny Day. Frank, I can't remember you said something about bells at one point that made me think that maybe you were playing Animal Crossing.
I am playing Animal Crossing, and I don't know what to say. Like, Animal Crossing is a game a lot of people are playing right now, and I don't want to harsh anybody's mellow. But I will tell you this much: I have never been more prepared to like a game. I've never been more interested and committed in having a game work. Uh, we are looking for a game that is cozy and low key and cute and relaxing, and I hate it so much. It is so not working for me and for
Well,
us. You know, Hillary and I are sitting on the couch in like mellow chill out mode in the evening and looking for just like it's exactly in theory the thing that we should be doing, and yet we just can't stand it. I hate Tom Nook. I hate this stupid island. It's so boring, and I hate it's like joining the Girl Scouts. You know, there's just so many rules and regulations. You're just constantly jumping through hoops. People who never shut up. The interface is terrible. It's like everything takes like 18 button presses, and you're just like constantly just grinding through these tedious, boring regulations and rules, and it's just it's the worst. So
yeah,
I
I think you're not
much
alone though.
prefer
That's the
Bunny
thing. I
Day
think it's
actually.
we were talking a couple weeks ago when Animal Crossing was coming out about a lot of the reaction of people who were stressed out by Animal Crossing, felt like it was like another layer of stress on top of everything else. And then now there's been an even bigger backlash, probably because of this event. And I don't know if you stuck around long enough for the Easter event to happen, but
Oh
that's
yeah,
what completely broke me. Right?
yeah.
I have gotten to the point now where I had to take a break from playing Animal Crossing, which for me means I know when I stop playing, and then when I start playing again, I set my clock to that time, and I go back in
Mm.
time to catch up if I want to. But I'm honestly not even sure if I can do that. The fascinating thing to me is that Animal Crossing has clearly been influenced since the GameCube version by a bunch of MMO design
Yeah.
and Facebook game design, probably most of all. This Facebook style of service game that then also sort of appeared a lot in mobile games in recent years. And now it's like, yeah, there's an event for every holiday, but they have now have several layers of events because they have this traditional like cherry blossom season and stuff in Animal Crossing that was even from the earlier versions. But now for New Horizons, they had to add new content because they have a fan base that wants new content. So they plastered this Easter event over the top, and it's just a disaster.
It's the
The
worst.
uh, the amazing thing to me is that they've had to patch this game like 6 times in the last week, and they're patching it in order to sometimes to fix problems in the interface, but sometimes to adjust drop rates of items,
Yeah.
like how often things are happening, which nobody running an online game would ever set up their code in a way where you have to like patch the game code on every client in order to adjust the drop rate. So it's like a bastard child of the original Animal Crossing, and yeah, just a whole bunch of online service lifestyle games that have appeared since. And that's where I think that my diagnosis was that they went where they went wrong.
Yeah, no, I think that's a deep reading of the situation and them trying to catch up to this kind of contemporary style of game as service but doing it using the tools of kind of traditional console game development is a disaster. But from the experiential level, I just feel like it's the worst form of the Nintendo style of paternalistic, patronizing infantilism, and I want it to work, and it's just not working for me. I want to just submit to this thing and be comforted, and like cradled in Shigeru Miyamoto's scrawny arms and just rocked to sleep. But it's not working.
Well,
And
it doesn't work because you're not like a kid anymore, right?
I don't care. I'm a child at heart.
Right, but you were more a child at heart when Super Mario 64 came out.
I just think that it's badly designed. I actually think that it's what is working for me is Ring Fit Adventure. Like that's a game that I think that's Nintendo at its best. I feel like I'm shocked by how well that works, how clever it is, how the device is really smart and well designed, and the experience I feel like is good, and the structure of it makes sense. So shout out to whoever is on the Ring Fit Adventure team. I'm not trying to throw Nintendo under the bus entirely. But
yeah, and you were actually one of the lucky people who got that game before all the price gouging started. A phenomenon which we may come back to later. Tin Cup is pointing out accurately that part of the reason why Animal Crossing is structured this way is because it has to be played completely offline in totally single player mode. Yeah. So if you want those players to actually get the benefit, then the game has to be patched, right? The I don't know if I entirely buy that from an infrastructure point of view. Like if you're going to patch something, you could also have it be an online contact of some sort that's not just a literal patch that has to go through Nintendo's approval process. You have to have a Nintendo Online account for a bunch of the functionality in this game, but it's not mandatory. But anyway, the point is it's janky because they're not thinking about it like a service game, but they've designed it like a service game because that's what's become popular.
I do think that it's a really good way to like do a design critique is to look at the technical infrastructure and the economic context and the business structure as part of the inputs into why something is or isn't working. So I actually think that that's really valuable and a good way to read the situation. I also want to recommend, for those of you who have not seen it, going back in the archives and checking out Naomi's deep reading of the Tom Nook loan logic and how it relates to the history of Japanese villages and the politics of that. So if you haven't checked that out,
speaking about it off on Twitter, that's our very next link, as I was complaining about this Easter event, right? So the thing I realized was, wait a second, I'm looking at forums on Reddit and Twitter, and there are all these people screaming about how they cannot get all of this traditional Japanese accessories that a lot of them probably don't even know what they are, right? Like, why do you have a picnic set with like certain types of dishes in it for sitting underneath a cherry blossom tree, right? Well, it's a tradition that goes back hundreds of years in Japan, but they can't get these cherry blossom items because they're basically being overwritten by the drop rate of the Easter item. So amazingly, this to me is kind of just replicating this logic of, Easter comes along, there's we have to fulfill consumer demand. We have to have this huge event with all of this stuff that you can get. And this older thing that we've had since the early 2000s, this cherry blossom stuff, it'll still be there, but actually it's just getting completely wiped out by the random generation and spawn tables. And for me, part of the big backstory here is that Tom Nook is sort of this representative of this earlier natural world, right? The name of Animal Crossing in Japanese is just Animal Forest, and I think of it as basically as being a direct successor to this movie Pompoko, which Miyazaki fans are probably familiar with. But everyone else, this is the biggest movie in Japan. It was the #1 movie in Japan of 1994. And it is about how raccoon dogs like Tom Nook are resisting the encroachment of human beings into sort of developing and bulldozing their forests, which then is exactly what you do in this iteration of Animal Crossing. So to me, there's some sort of like amazing logic that actually recapitulates the film here, because in the film, a bunch of the raccoon dogs who can transform themselves to look like humans temporarily, a bunch of them just decide, you know what, I'm going to go live in human society and get a job and just be a business person. And then there's some of them can't do that, and so they continue to live in the parks and beg for food off of their relatives. But you could kind of see Tom Nook in this context as being like, well, you know, it makes sense for Tom Nook to become a real estate tycoon if all of these sort of the older traditions, including cherry blossom viewing, are kind of like subsumed underneath this this logic of expansion. And I don't know, there's just so much fascinating layers to this, like including the one that we talked about last time, that system.
Once again, your deeply literate reading of Animal Crossing has made me appreciate the game more, and maybe I'll go back to it. But is it? Are you supposed to hate Tom Nook?
Kind of, yeah. I mean, he's the source of pressure, right?
Much that the only thing motivating us to play this game is to try to figure out how to bankrupt him. Like, we want to just destroy him and his stupid island and his whole empire.
Well, I think the intention, probably from a Japanese point of view, is that you're supposed to feel guilty towards Tom Nook, which is not, it's not a emotion that's as easy to evoke, I think, for Western audiences, unless you trick them into killing a whole bunch of civilians, like some shooters do.
Right.
But if Tom Nook, gives you a place to live and is like, sure, you can pay me back whenever, you're probably mostly supposed to feel like, oh, I really owe this guy a ton. Like, I have to be nice to him. I have to do what he says. And so it is a feeling of psychological pressure, but it doesn't tend to arouse anger in the sort of the Japanese.
I want to blanket Tom Nook with white phosphate.
Yeah, there you go.
That's my motivation. I don't want to just eradicate. I hate the way he talks, the sound of his voice, and I hate what he says to me. And I hate the fact that he's constantly giving orders and instructions.
I would read him as trying to teach human beings a lesson somehow. That would be my reading.
Lesson unlearned.
All right, let's go on to the next set of links. So, yeah, this was something we wanted to get to last week, and there's just been a huge spate of articles coming out about, like this article from the San Francisco Bay Reporter. So you're finally going to get into video games. Lots of journalists, and honestly, not all game journalists, but often just regular columnists for a paper like this guy. This guy's actually a music critic, this dude whose face is here on the screen. I feel bad for him that he put his headshot so huge here, because this is a terrible article. So all of these articles have the same premise, which you can see here in the subhead. Oh, why don't you start playing video games? And in this case, the way he answers the question is, well, let me tell you, okay, there's Xbox One, there's PlayStation 4, and there's Nintendo Switch. And I can tell you, like, here's why you would get each one of those, and like some good games for them, right? But his recommendations are basically just the same thing you would see if you looked at the top 10 sales list for any of these consoles. So it's really odd. It's basically being like, yeah, buy one of these consoles. Of course, they're all sold out, maybe because of articles like this. But there's a huge range of articles of this sort, and that's what I find really interesting. They take different tacks, right? So if you go to the next link, the Washington Post, which, as we mentioned a few months ago on this broadcast, has launched this vertical about games, also has like a here's how you can start being a gamer article. And this one is really very middlebrow. It's just a bunch of very safe mainstream recommendations. It's as if the editor said, just tell them about a bunch of games that everyone's bound to like, right? So again, they're sort of pushing the Switch, which is the most out of stock. And and all the recommendations are basically what you would expect if you just asked some journalist friend of yours, like, oh, so what games are popular?
Are they recommending Breath of the Wild in this particular list?
I think that Breath of the Wild is in here. It's in a bunch of these lists.
Yeah, that would be like an obvious one. I think more obvious than a lot of these other ones.
Red Dead Redemption is on a ton of these lists, right? And And then there are some weird ones too. Like if you go to the next article from the New York Times, it's kind of fascinating because wait, who wrote this New York Times one? I can't remember.
Seth Schiesel.
Seth Schiesel.
Yeah.
Right. So Seth is makes some interesting recommendations. He's like, oh, you know what you should play? King of Dragon Pass.
And like, EVE Online.
What? King of Dragon Pass.
I went and I clicked on his byline and went and looked at his list of articles. And there's an interesting story that's told if you do that, because he has a ton of articles from 2010 and 2011, 2012. Then you don't hear nothing from Seth Schiesel until 2018, where he has an article about how gamer culture is toxic. And then in 2019, there's an article about why you should boycott Blizzard. And now in April 2020, he's got like 5 articles, right?
Yeah,
how to, what games you should play when you're at home, games you can play with your kids that won't drive you crazy.
But he recommends a ton of really hardcore games. He's like, oh, you should try Dwarf Fortress. You should try Factorio. How about the Civilization series? And what was the other? Oh, and Kerbal Space Program and Frostpunk. People getting into games are gonna love all of those.
It's weirdly random.
So it's great because I'm like, okay, I love hearing about people's idiosyncratic tastes. It's very strange that the New York Times is like, here's our list of recommended games, and it's like extremely nerdy stuff. So, and of course, then there's Red Dead Redemption. It's sort of sitting right in there in the middle, like the big cherry that's on everyone's list. But then let's go to the next couple.
Is that a good?
Sorry, go ahead.
What is the good version of this? You like this other article?
Okay, so Mashable.
What are the one that you like? Because I don't like this.
This is one that I like.
One, and we're going to disagree about this. So
yeah, so we're definitely disagree about this. This is also probably not good for beginners in some ways. Who wrote this one? Jess Joho, who I don't know, but Jess Joho is like, oh, okay, let me tell you about the nice indie games that have come out recently. Right, and these are all like the nice games. It's Old Man's Journey, Untitled Goose Game. I think there's like that the Taxi Cab game is in here. Donut County, Monument Valley.
Donut County.
Gorogoa.
Okay, so this is definitely the cool list, right? So this is the list that's like much more like, okay, guys, here's the cool games, like Red Dead Redemption, whatever. But now, like, this is the list you might get from like a more sophisticated, kind of well-informed, slightly hipsterish kind of knowledge.
If you ask a hipster, like, what video game should I play?
The reality is this list is just as bad as all the others. And if you look at each individual game here, the Goose Game, who cares? I mean, Old Man Journey, whatever. Watam? Oh, great. Oh, yeah, let's all play Watam. Have you played Watam? Has anyone played Watam?
And then Stardew Valley and The Sims 4 in there as like solid, meaty entrees.
Donut County? What? Like, hello, 2018 called. They want their indie game back. Monument Valley? Really? Oh, you're telling? Okay, that's what? Like, of course, everyone has already played Monument Valley. Gorogoa, whatever. It's fine. Animal Crossing, we already, dismantled. Stardew Valley.
Well, so this is a great guide if you're like, okay, what's going on? What's interesting that's going on in games that I don't know about? That's sort of against the stereotypical idea that I already have about video games, right? If you're trying to convince somebody, oh, actually, video games can be a lot more than just this stuff that you see advertised all the time, then this is the list to convince them. But
although that's also true of Seth Schiesel. Like, EVE Online is not advertised all the time. King of Dragon Pass is not advertised all the time.
Yeah, but nobody's going to play those games, right? They're gonna like bounce off of the first 5 minutes of those games.
They're not going to bounce off the first 5 minutes of Watam?
Maybe, well, no, actually, I think, have you played the first 5 minutes of Watam? It's actually designed.
It's horrible.
Okay.
I hate that game. It is everything I hate. It is the worst video game ever made.
I'm not going to try to make a case for it long term, but you see what they're doing here, right? They've got Journey and Flower and all this stuff. It's a little predictable from
I like everything is on this list, but even everything, like, I love everything. I mean, I think everything is a masterpiece, and I agree with you that this list, in terms of its breadth and variety, is really good. And I guess really what I'm saying is not that this particular list is bad or that any of these games are bad, except for Watam, which we all agree is bad. But what I'm saying is, it's a genuinely hard problem.
Yeah.
This, like, there is no good version of this. because there's no like there's kind of no good way of getting into games. Like there's no like
hard.
you have to find your own path. That and I don't know what that path is. The thing I always tell people is that enter games through your friends. Find your friends who are playing a game, find what game they're playing, and play that game with them or alongside them.
Sure.
So that you have some context for thinking about it and talking about it. So if your games are playing, if your friends are playing Sea of Thieves, play Sea of Thieves. If they're playing Vanilla WoW, play Vanilla WoW. If they are playing Valorant, play Valorant. You know, if they're playing Overwatch, play Overwatch. If they're playing, you know what I mean? Like, games are social again.
Right.
And they always have been.
This is a good time to
now we're
get into
rediscovering
online games.
And also maybe newspapers are dead. Maybe all these newspaper articles about what games to play are all also just the dying groans of an old medium trying to make sense of a new one.
Well, let's go to the New York Magazine article, because this is the one that I think has the unusual take, which is like, don't listen to anyone telling you what games are good. Instead, play a big dumb video game. Yeah. That's what you should be doing. I think this is the closest to trying to take a real psychological approach.
Yeah.
That's a little bit below the surface, not just facile, like play a nice, sweet game like Animal Crossing, right? Instead, it's saying, look, you need to do the equivalent of making yourself an enormous bowl of pasta.
Yeah.
And then just sitting on the couch and being like,
yeah.
Yeah. And so
I wouldn't.
We're familiar with this phenomenon.
I wouldn't tell people to play this game. Which game is this that he's talking about?
Don't know. It looks like Oddworld. That creature.
No. It's. I'm sorry. Thank you.
Borderlands. Okay. Borderlands. Yeah, no wonder it looks like Oddworld.
So listen, whatever. Borderlands 3 is whatever. But and there is something about this take which at least starts to approximate. I think the way that people, I don't know, the way you should be thinking about this question, which is that it's really complicated and multi-layered,
right.
And the quote unquote good games are not always good, and the quote unquote bad games are not always bad. And this is what actual kind of like the development of a sophisticated critical approach kind of looks like. It's like, oh, things are counterintuitive. Oh, you need to kind of like look beyond the obvious stories of what is good quality and bad quality, what is mainstream and what is indie, you know, what games are good for you and what games are bad for you. And instead, think about your own experience, think about your own taste, think about your own needs, and understand that there's not going to be a kind of one size fits all turnkey solution to games, right? That you need to find your own path and find your own way. I think that's kind of smart about this article.
Yeah, and this article starts off by saying, oh, there are all of these other articles making you recommendations about what's good, and you could play Jackbox with your friends, or you could play Animal Crossing, or you could play Ring Fit Adventure. But really, I suggest you just do what I'm doing, which is, you know, just eating an enormous pile of macaroni and cheese by playing Borderlands 3. I think this is interesting because everybody who has like a certain kind of relationship with games, and it's most gamers and most game developers too, honestly, at some point, knows this psychological phenomenon, right? Yes. Where you're like, I'm kind of depressed, or it's a long winter and I have nothing to do, or whatever is the case, right? And you just kind of sink into a game like a big chair like this. So it strikes me that maybe what we should be talking about is different kinds of flavors that you could look for, like things that you, just like you wouldn't say, here are foods to eat during a pandemic. Right?
That's exactly the right way to think about it. So how do you develop your taste? Well, part of developing your taste is hanging out with smart, cool people that have spent a lot of time thinking about the thing and listening to how they talk and kind of like trying to understand, you know, how they make judgments. Part of developing your taste is tasting different things and paying attention to certain, like what can you taste the difference between these two peppers, right? Can you taste what's happening in this fish dish? That, you know what I mean? Can you understand why people like to prepare fish this way. Like, you don't have to like it, but can you even distinguish between these kinds of spices or these, and just it's I think that's what this article is doing a little bit. It's fun to see these different critics kind of trying to like rise to the occasion of this moment. I think Brian Feldman is actually doing a good job. And in some ways, his take is a little bit closer to what I would think of as being the kind of sophisticated New York scene intellectual approach to games, which often has this thing in it of being like, yes, Kentucky Route Zero, but also Borderlands 3. Like, Borderlands 3 surprisingly has opportunities for meaning making, right? For doing something interesting and important that might not be apparent on the surface. So this kind of embracing the dumb, or the ostensibly dumb thing, this kind of punk rock gesture of 3 chords, loud, hard, fast. I think of this as being a very New York, a very East Coast game intellectual take, versus the West Coast approach, which I think is more like, oh yeah, Kentucky Route Zero and Sky, and no one says Sky, but Flower,
No, now I'm worried that Chris showed up in chat again.
Is Chris here? Now that I'm talking shit about the West Coast, where's Chris? Shout out to Chris Bell in the chat.
But but this points out that Seth Sheesa's article would be better if he was like, look, here's what I turn to.
Yes.
These like super crunchy strategy games that will take you forever to get into, but like forever to get out of also. I just want to go like really deep into this maze of strategy and numbers. And so just understanding what different people are going for is great. And I kind of agree with what Rice Theft said in chat. Like, just play all the games, or at least sample them, get a flavor, right?
Yes. And sample them in a way that you're paying attention to your own heart and your own tongue. You know what I mean? Like, start to develop the ability to distinguish between these different things. And when you like a thing, let yourself like it, but also like pay attention to why you're liking it. And then also pay attention to the urge to like, well, Naomi, you've talked about this a lot. Like, good taste is a journey, right? Good taste is a vector, as we might say, in teaching game development, right? It is a direction. It's a line that goes in a direction, right? It's not a set of criteria that you apply. It's a desire to be climbing a certain mountain, right? I always want to be a cooler, slightly more interesting version of myself. I'm always seeking out, like, what is the smarter, more interesting version of me like, and then I'm trying to put those things in my mouth and see if I can like them, right? And that's how I learned to like martinis, and that's how I learned to like jazz, and that's how and that's how I approach games that I'm not sure I like yet, but I think I might want to like. That's what tastes.
And sometimes you destroy your own tastes on purpose to sort of like go in another direction. I mean, there's all sorts of things. People are asking like, okay, how come we don't talk about this more often? I think, like you and I talk about this a lot. If anybody's curious, there is, I think, on the NYU Game Center's YouTube or on our Vimeo lecture where I go on about this for like 2 hours, called Tasting Games. But
good.
Yeah, let's keep going and see what we have next. I think actually now is the time to talk about price gouging. Let's go to the price gouging article. All right. Now that LA Times article is perfectly good. But okay, here's a great article. This is an interview with a guy who drove across the United States, going to every big box store and buying up every Nintendo Switch, iPhone, other consoles that he could find, so that when he got to the end of his journey, he could just make money selling them on eBay for like a markup of like $60 to $80 or something like that. That's how he was making for every Switch. And he did this because he lost his job, probably due to, I don't know. Initially I imagined, oh, this must be because he lost his job due to coronavirus shutting things down. But in order to get all these things, I would imagine he would have had to start pretty early. So it's an interesting question, right? Like price gougers and hoarders and people doing this kind of arbitrage have emerged as easy to hate villains during this pandemic. Personally, I have no problem with authorities like seizing a warehouse full of sanitizer or masks or ventilators from people who are sitting on it doing nothing. Whether they should have any kind of some sort of compensation at like a base rate in compensation for that kind of seizure, that sort of the eminent domain, which normally I'm not in favor of, is an interesting question. But then when it comes to this type of stuff, like, okay, this person is price gouging entertainment systems, which I don't know, are they necessities? Is this how serious this is compared to medical supplies? Like obviously less serious, but some people really wish they had a copy of Ring Fit Adventure. I do. Other people really wish they had a Nintendo Switch.
Yeah.
Yeah.
From each, according to their level of boredom, to each, according to their willingness to tolerate weird, patronizing Nintendo over design.
We may get there eventually.
I think, so thank you for teeing up the meta systems moment in this week's discourse. How should we be thinking about this? So I'm not going to tell you how to think about price gouging, but I will say that if there is such a thing as a kind of systems literacy that we as game designers and game players should be developing, then you should be able to understand the pro and con arguments about price gouging. You should be aware that virtually all kind of mainstream economists have a take on price gouging that is not criticizing it, right? That you should understand what the argument is that price gouging often serves an important function in the delivery of necessary goods to the people that need them. That actually, in many situations, the people price gouging, even though they are trying to seek their own benefit, are improving the welfare of everyone. It's a kind of a complicated, counterintuitive argument. You should be aware that it is out there, and you should look at it and understand it, and then come to your own conclusion about how you think about price gouging. But if you're not able to follow that argument, which is, like I said, it's basically the mainstream position and for all economists, if you're not able to even kind of follow why they're not outraged at price gouging and they believe that we should not have laws against it, then I think you've got a little bit of work to do to kind of get to the point where you at least can understand why, how that argument operates and what's behind it. Then come to your own conclusion about price gouging. That's my take. That's the meta systems take.
Yeah, and my understanding of these arguments is that the where the actual discussion is around the edges is about the limits, like where do you draw the line, right? So if you're in a situation where the market is not going to have a time to respond to increased prices, right? Where there's things are falling apart, this is disaster and emergency, that's where some people, and actually some economists too, right, make an argument that, look, there are emergency situations where the market's not going to function as expected. Or there are situations with price setting in general, not being efficient for, say, pricing malaria drugs, right? That's something a lot of economists have complained about, that some intervention is necessary to set price ceilings on certain types of goods, usually related to healthcare, which is also sort of what a bunch of this current discussion is about around COVID supplies. Yes. So there seem to be just some things around the edges where you say okay, maybe as economists we believe that price gouging does serve a certain type of function, but then there are edge cases where that starts to break down.
Sure. Yeah. No, this is not a simple thing. Which is why I'm saying that it's more important to understand the arguments than it is to to know what the right solution is. There is no clear, obvious, right way to think about it. But I recommend, if you're interested, like there's an amazingly good podcast. It's a conversation between Mike Munger and Russ Roberts. It's an econ talk about price gouging, and they talk about it in the context of hurricanes and people with ice. Rednecks who load up their pickup truck with a bunch of ice and drive it into into a place that needs ice. People are desperate for ice, and then they're charging like $20 a bag for ice, and then the police come and they shut them down. And they take those bags of ice and they dump them in the river, and everyone cheers. Like the people standing in line to buy the ice, who can't get ice any other way, are cheering that they can no longer buy the ice. Like it's a really complicated, difficult.
It is. Yeah, no, that I think points out how interesting it is. The fact that they're cheering that they can't get this thing that they desperately need.
Yeah.
Because they feel like they're being exploited, right?
Yeah. And it is system dynamics in a way that game designers should be developing an understanding and a literacy in. And so that's why I think it's so important for us.
The retail arbitrage thing is an interesting case with this guy, though, because what he's doing is he's buying things from, he was buying things from retail stores that were not selling them online and then selling them online. So in some ways, he's performing a service. But a bunch of other people, like this was the case with Ring Fit that you got, that others that didn't get, like me, that the available stock online was all purchased by resellers. And so they drove the price up, even though the game was perfectly available before and would have just sold, so because the official retailers won't boost the price up to $200, somebody else will do that arbitrage, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah. And now there are a bunch of copies out there that are sitting that you can buy, but nobody's buying them because they've gone up to $200. Mm-hmm. And so less exercise is being had out in the gaming world.
Well, I'll sell you my copy of Ring Fit Adventure for the right price.
All right, yeah, let's do that. I will once you're done with it, I'll buy it from you. I want to and make me an offer how much you want to sell it to me for, and then I will announce what the offer was. Okay, so there's been a brief dissent in chat about some people actually feel like Watom is a good game.
I don't know what to say to those people. I think Watom is objectively bad. I don't think there's any argument to be had here. It's just, I don't know. Who can decide? I mean, this is.
We need the counterpoint argument. I can't necessarily do it. I thought Watom is fine as an experience. It didn't really grab me. I think it's great for what it is, which is just a simple little playful thing where you can make friends with poop and hold hands with it. That, for me, is all that it needs to justify itself. And there are just mini games and puzzles. So there's nothing about it that really offended me enough. Honestly, that's how I feel.
Yeah, in that case, maybe I'm wrong. I have a very conflicted relationship to Keita Takahashi. I understand like what is what people love about him and his work. I understand what's great about Katamari Damacy. I understand why that game is important and why people love it. I think Watom is like watching him have a public breakdown. I think it's unpleasant. It's, to me, I don't think this is Takahashi, having a good time and making a game that is expression of joy and happiness in his heart. I feel like it's a cry for help, and it made me uncomfortable. So that's my take on it.
You like a recording artist being forced to fulfill the terms of their contract or something like that?
Yeah, it just felt like deeply unpleasant and broken to me. But that's just my, obviously, guys, it's my personal take. I'm joking. It's not. There is no objective good or bad. I hope people understand that. But this game, I would say this game didn't work for me, but it weirdly did. Like some games are just I'm indifferent to, and then some games really connect with me and feel like they have something to say. And I feel like Watam was like weirdly broken in a way that I felt was deeply expressive of something, but something unpleasant, and someone who was kind of struggling to make sense of video games and their own creative practice. So yeah, sorry, Kata, I love you, but this ain't it for me. Next time though, next time.
In chat, what Tom's being likened to a green nutrient cube. That's the food that it is. Just maybe provides you with some nutrition in the form of amusement. But yeah, actually, I think the real suggestion was probably that we should have a letters to the editor.
Oh, that's a good idea. That's a great idea. Who suggested that?
Somebody in chat. I'm sorry, I missed exactly who it was.
Shout out to the genius who suggested that. We're definitely doing it.
Yeah, so we'll do it.
Letters to the editor. That's the new feature. With the last 5 or 10 minutes. It was Robert Yang.
Oh, it was Robert. Okay.
No.
Yeah, so Robert, you set that up then. Or honestly, you guys in chat can shout out if there's something you want us to address. But maybe for next time, we can basically take one question or letter from the editor for next.
Come on, chat, up your game. We already knew Robert was a genius. Like that's not information.
It's too late, Robert. You already made more work for yourself. Let's actually zoom forward, in part because of something that was said in chat. Okay, yeah, so first we have to take a second for this. This was a screenshot that I believe one of our adjuncts at the Game Center found on Facebook. This Chris Wallace submitted this. The gamepreneur, somebody who's trying to make a lot of money off of the current games boom, has pointed out that
Naomi, that this is bad face hygiene, right? So you know how important this gesture is if I'm risking my life to make it.
Yeah, look at this guy. He's telling you how you can make money without ever leaving your home, which you're not allowed to do right now anyway. The gamerpreneur. Okay, now that we've taken a moment for that, I want to go way forward to the Slate article. It's one of the last links in our whole roundup today. It's the second to last one, Robert. Right, so this is the question, like, do we live in cyberpunk right now? Some people have made the argument, like, we've been in cyberpunk for well over a decade now, but this question has come up again, right? In part because everyone is online all the time now. Some people are being represented by just their furry avatars being mocap to their faces, something I've been accused of doing at times. And also government seems to be totally unreliable. Like, we no longer have this, like, I'm not sure you could make Men in Black now, right? This idea of like, oh, these people in black suits will show up and they'll like take care of everything and clean everything up. Like that kind of ominous government force, like, seems like nobody could take it seriously anymore because the men from the government no longer show up to like take care of anything. Like you were saying last week, Frank, there's been this sort of general institutional breakdown.
You know what our Men in Black
is? That's a feature of cyberpunk too.
You know what our Men in Black is, Naomi? It's
what?
SCP Wiki.
It's what?
SCP Wiki.
Oh, SCP Wiki,
yeah,
right.
So that's our Men in Black, and it's much more complicated. It's not this authoritative trust like secret, but kind of like cool, like James Bond like thing. It's a messed up, dysfunctional, bureaucratic labyrinth of regulations and rules, many of which are contradictory, and at the heart of which is memes and anti-memes, right? The heart of SCP Wiki is the anti-memetics division.
Right.
And if you drill down into SCP Wiki, which I think SCP Wiki is legitimately some of the best science fiction happening in the world right now.
Parts of it.
Better than the Marvel movies. Better than Annihilation. It's smart. interesting science fiction. And if you drill into SCP Wiki, at the heart of it, the beating heart of it, is the Anti-Memetics Division arc. And it is like anti-Men in Black in a weird way. It's a beautiful, weird story. And it speaks to this moment so much because it is about sense making. It's about collective sense making. It's about how do we understand the world? How do we communicate that understanding to each other? How do we shape the world through the ways in which we talk about it, through our institutions and our regulations and our language and our norms and our customs, and what are the bonds that connect us as people, and how does that fit into this larger thing? I just think that's my plea for people to read that, because I think it's beautiful.
Yeah, and the interesting thing is at the edges of the SCP Wiki, it's metastasized into all of these other groups and foundations and competing like rival organizations that have their own aims, right? That see the world in different ways. It kind of reminds me of your Magic Colors article.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Right. And
very much inspired by SCP Wiki.
Right.
And it's really sad that Control was such a bad game, because Control was, I think, deeply influenced by SCP and has some of the vibe, some of the aesthetics of it, but I feel like was not really a playable game. So that's unfortunate.
Yeah, if only the what was it? The combat was what everyone was mad about in Control. Now just like with Wadham, we're now getting objections to you for saying that Control was an objectively bad game.
Guys, you know that this is my thing, right? I make these claims that my aesthetic judgments are objective facts when I know that they're not. So I hope the fact that I have to explain that, it makes me uncomfortable. But Control is not good. Are people out there saying Control is good? You're flying around, you're throwing furniture at things. Control should have committed to like SCP gameplay, right? But instead they took SCP style, and they took the mood of that game, and they took the beautiful visual aesthetics of this kind of gorgeous brutalist architecture. And then they wrapped it around the most boring and conventional AAA action adventure gameplay imaginable. So formulaic, so tedious. No, we don't want to do that. And we don't want to fly around and shoot things and throw furniture at it. That's just placeholder. That's placeholder gameplay. Come on. That's what you're going to bring to SCP Wiki and brutalism. You're going to bring this kind of AAA formulaic placeholder of like the kinds of, like, this is what you off the shelf gameplay you get when you can't be bothered to design a game. I'm sorry. That ain't right.
Questions come up. What is SCP gameplay? Like what would that look like? Certainly much more imaginative than what we're seeing on the screen, right? And no, power fantasy's not an excuse.
The verbs would be secure, control, protect. It would be about seeking out anomalies and trying to understand them and trying to prevent them from destroying humanity, right? It would be about it would be about belonging to an organization where you don't even know whether the bureau that you're a part of exists, and trying to make sense of that through emails and memos and meetings and conversations.
Yeah, and you're making bureaucratic decisions about how to contain this thing, and if you're wrong, you get killed almost immediately, right?
Yeah.
And maybe you have the small chance of surviving, and you go back and repeat it over and over again because you're playing a video game. You just load and repeat.
Yes.
And you try to get it right.
A little bit more like the DLC for what's that science fiction game by the people who made Dishonored?
Yeah, I know what you're talking about.
There's DLC called Moon Crash, right?
Yeah, Arcane's most recent Prey.
Okay,
yeah, Prey,
Moon Crash, which is the DLC for Prey. I think if you took, like, that's a hint at what I think SCP gameplay would be like. It's this weird kind of story-driven, roguelike, action adventure puzzle solving thing, which I didn't play because I couldn't get through Prey. I got so bored of Prey.
Right.
Prey is like,
if you took
this kind of generic running around shooting gameplay. So
if you want to know what the mechanics are, it's like if you took a bunch of Davy Radin and William Pugh games,
yes,
and you mush them up and you boil them down into something,
yes,
and then you inject it into Prey. Then you
Yes.
would have an SCP game with SCP mechanics, because it has to be a little bit more warped.
Get Davey Reedon on the phone. What's he doing right now? Anyway, he's making a game, I think with some of our students, right? I think
Possibly.
Davey Reedon hired some recent alums, or at least one of them, and is working on some cool new game, but it's not this. Maybe it should be.
Indeed. So wait, where even were we? What were we talking about? We were talking about whether we live in cyberpunk already, right? Like the devolution of government, the FAA NG corporations kind of running everything. I don't know. This is a like a frequent complaint. It feels like maybe we're accelerating into this, but maybe it's just the fact that the internet is still working, even though nothing else is working.
I don't know. As someone who grew up reading science fiction, I enjoy moments where I'm reminded that I live in the future, right? I remember when I first walked into a sports stadium for an esports event, right? League of Legends finals. I walked into the Staples Center and I got a whiff of the future. Like, and all of a sudden it hit me. Oh, this is weird. Like, this is super weird that there's a stadium full of people watching people play a video game. Sometimes I'll be on the subway. You know, I remember this is from 5 years ago. I was on the subway and I looked over and I saw a teenager and they were playing Picross 3D on their DS. And I was like, yeah, that's what video games should look like, right? This weird, oblique teenage culture from the future that's like abstract, and it looks like the game that the kid is playing in Children of Men. You know the scene in Children of Men where they're at the table and the autistic teenager is like playing this little game, rotating this thing like a Rubik's Cube?
Right, because that's what autistic people do, is just constantly rotate geometric objects, right?
Yeah, I don't... It's the character. The kid, I know. Like, okay, I'm sorry. Maybe that was a hate crime. I apologize. But
no. I'm complaining about the movie. But
the movie's good. That's a great movie. And that's a wonderful scene just because it captures that feeling of strangeness. I want video games to have that kind of weirdness, right? I want them to have that kind of, they should feel like teenage culture from the future that it's hard to understand and disorienting and strange and gives you a sense of dislocation, because that's what good science fiction does. That's what good cyberpunk does. It's not that it's a cool style, it's that it reminds you that the world is strange in the sense of being arbitrary, right? In the sense of it's possible the world could be different, and that the structures that we live inside of, that we think of as being inevitable or natural or given, are none of those things. That they are the result of choices that we make. They benefit some people and harm others, that they could be different. There are better ways of organizing the world. There are different ways of organizing the world. Some of them are worse, right? And some of them are better. And that's I think that's what good science fiction does. It reminds you that, and that's why Hillary hates it, by the way. She's like, oh God, I hate science fiction, because I think every science fiction story is always about, well, on this planet, you have to pay for air and words are made of rocks, you know? And it's like, and it's always about figuring out what the gimmick is, you know, figuring out what the gimmick is. But that's what I
should tell the No Man's Sky team about that idea.
And so, yes, we are now living in a cyberpunk world in the sense that we're all being reminded on a daily basis that the systems and the structures and the norms and the conventions and the culture that we are all a part of are up for grabs. That they could be arranged differently. We can do things differently, and so the way things are is weird and it's kind of surprising and has a logic to it. In the same way that you were talking about how to understand the problems with Animal Crossing by looking at the constraints they were under when they built it, in terms of the tools they're using, the platform they're on, their business model, their corporate structure. Like, we should be doing the same thing for the world, right? What is the underlying dynamics? What are the underlying systems that then produce this world that we find ourselves in? And just to be reminded that that those exist and that we have access to them and we can do something about it.
Yeah, no, I
think
know what you mean. And so that this is it's a big project with the world. I remember you were complaining about stories, like facile stories last week or the week before, or multiple times. And I keep thinking that the same thing is sort of true of trying to understand what's going on in the underpinning of narratives, right? Which are very powerful psychologically. That's part of why I'm interested in this question about cyberpunk, because I have some problems with viewing using cyberpunk as the lens with which to understand what's happening right now. And part of it is exactly what you pointed out about cool sci-fi, right? The later this year, CD Projekt Red's next game is going to come out, Cyberpunk 2077, and a lot of it is very much about the coolness of being in a cyberpunk world, right? And that, I think it's funny because once you get enmeshed in this idea of, oh, I could be a resident in this weird kind of unusual, slightly shocking dystopia, then it becomes less tempting, I think, to try and actually get at okay, why are these things happening the way they are right now? What's going on? Let's try to unthink the premises of the story in the first place, or understand well, why did these three guys on the screen right now, Sterling, Williams, and Gibson, why did they write cyberpunk the way they did? And it actually gets into this in the article that they were kind of complaining about the long 1980s and the retraction of government from the public sphere, which they saw as a danger, and that's what they were sort of projecting forward. Now we're at a really different point where I don't know if the 1980s version of cyberpunk makes sense anymore. Now it's sort of just become trappings. It's like, okay, let's rest on our laurels and imagine a cool world where I have a chrome arm, right? And so I don't know. We need to come up with something better than doing another rehash of Blade Runner.
Here. Like science fiction is not about looking back at what happened 30 years ago and trying to recapture that style. It's about putting together, drawing from history for sure, like the way that cyberpunk did, right? The way cyberpunk drew from noir and those older kind of styles and combined it with what was happening. We need to do the equivalent. Like we need to invent our science fiction style that reflects the contemporary moment. And I think it's more likely to be something like vaporwave than it is to be cyberpunk.
Interesting, a subtle distinction.
Yeah.
Let's see. Do we have time for one more link? Gosh, I don't even know what to pick. But
should we end by talking a little bit? Should we applaud the IT people who are keeping the internet running? I feel like that's one thing we mentioned. It's amazing that everyone is now constantly streaming, a million gigabits of content at all times and doing 24/7 video conferencing, and things are basically working. Like the internet has not melted down, and I can't explain why that happened, but I'm really grateful for it. And so I want to salute the people who are out there keeping the internet running during this time.
It's interesting. I wonder, are there people? Well, of course, there are always people trying to maintain the backbones, keep things running. But are they having to make a heroic effort right now in order to keep things up? I'm not entirely clear whether they're having to bust ass as much as people grocery store delivery people, honestly, who deserve hazard pay out there on the streets bringing food to people. But the internet strikes me as a victory of infrastructure, right?
Yes.
It's like the highway system. I mean, obviously it's been likened to the highway system for decades, but we don't marvel that all the interstate highways in the US haven't completely crumbled by now. Because there actually have been very good plans put in place by the government to keep those things maintained. In most, not true in every state for the state highways, but the interstates run very reliably. And the internet is also, it's engineered very well. It's engineered to handle really high peak loads. Like when Princess Diana died, that was a huge early oh shit. That's what the fact that Princess Diana died way back when, and the internet kind of broke.
Yeah.
that is kind of what paved the way for us actually being able to have this time right now where we can all video chat with each other,
Yeah.
right? Because it's
So
been
first of all,
decades and decades of like getting hammered.
I'm pretty sure Princess Di is still alive. That's a side issue. We can talk about that later. More importantly, I think that's what we should be celebrating. If what these IT nerds did was put systems in place that were capable of managing these huge spikes during Black Swan events, then and now they're just sitting back with their feet up on the desk eating Cheetos, then that's what we should be applauding. Like that's the thinking we need. That's what we should be putting in place for our medical systems and our healthcare systems,
right,
and our political systems. Is
and
that
maybe
kind
climate
of
change too, like slow, hard work over the course of decades to build resilience, right? We're seeing that with the internet right now, and it could be true of so many other systems.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, that's probably a good place to leave it. We just hit 1 o'clock. Excellent.
2 thumbs up. Thanks, chat. As
yeah, good
always,
recommendations in chat too.
Love you.
Paul Ford article.
Thank you.
On how they balance traffic load. Yeah, that I remember.
Yeah.
That's a good one. Definitely.
Shout out to Mirabai. Amazing titles as always. Robert Yang, you know we love you. Thank you for doing what you do.
Thank you, Mirabai. Thanks, Robert.
And Naomi, you're the best. Naomi puts all of this together and she does the heavy lifting. So thank you, Naomi.
All right, we'll see you guys later.
All right, bye everyone. Have a good rest of your
Bye.
day. Bye.
Have a good day.